Welcome to Paranormal M, where we bring you tales of the uncanny. We give you first-hand encounters, mostly submissions by you, our listeners. Drop a comment on somebody's story. Let's get started. I used to live next to a cemetery. Can spirits just pass through? I, a female, 24 years old. I used to move around a lot until my dad got remarried. We moved to the Midwest. The house I ended up spending the rest of my adolescent and teen years in was built by 2 houses down from our small town cemetery. We were the first ones ever to own the land and build on it, so we were also the first people to live in our house. But that hasn't stopped weird things from happening. When I was 11, I'd moved into the new bedroom in the basement, got one of those loft beds with a desk underneath the top bunk. One night I woke up in the middle of the night to my TV was going in and out of signal, then went back to sleep after I turned it off. But when I laid back down, I felt something caress my hair for like a solid 30 seconds. It wasn't threatening, but I just froze until it stopped. Tried forcing myself to sleep. We've always had a dog in the house, and they've never acted weird. But when I was 14, my mom and I were cleaning a room in our basement to get ready for a slumber party I was having. We both heard what sounded like my dog coming down the stairs. Stop at the landing. So I went to go greet him. He was getting older, and the stairs are a little more difficult for him now. Well, he wasn't there. So I called his name. He was sitting in my parents' room with my dad. I know my mom heard the footsteps too, but to this day, she denies that it happened. Nothing happened again until about maybe 16. I was having friends sleep over. The 4 of us are pretty musical, so we had our guitars and ukuleles propped up against the wall or laying on the floor. The 4 of us all woke up around the same time at like 4 a.m. We heard the strings being plucked and strummed, like very gently. Today I haven't heard or seen anything out of the ordinary. None of these little instances were ever threatening or scary. Just kind of peculiar. I would usually brush them off the next day, but, well, my friends always believed it was a ghost or something. I am a huge believer in the paranormal, but I've never really had any experiences that were undeniably spooky, so I never gave these events much thought. But now I think maybe there's spirits passing through, because they were so near and far between, and also because I lived next to a cemetery. Spirit of my grandmother helps my mom process her grief. First, my mom is diagnosed with PTSD, and on top of that, she has anxiety. She's had a hard time dealing with bad and sad things. She also tends to emotionally shut down when things get tough. She is in therapy, and has been for nearly a decade. She had a really traumatic childhood. My grandmother, my mom's mother-in-law, died in 2019. My mom loved my grandma like her own mom. Her death was rather sudden, dying of heart failure, and she didn't really bother telling anyone in the family about it. My mom also lost another mother figure to her around the same time. My mom was also about 16 weeks pregnant at that same time. She had me young, and is only in her mid-40s now. The combination of the loss of my grandma and my other mother figure that was lost caused my mom to miscarry. She ended up needing a D&C to get the fetus out. It wasn't expelling naturally. It was going into decomposition. The combination of all three losses had my mom spiraling. She was closing off to my dad, to myself, my sisters. We were all so worried about her. She was like this for a few months, till she started to come back. Turns out that she had a dream. In the dream, she saw my grandma and my great-grandma, who passed away in 2006. They were sitting at my grandma's old dining room table and drinking coffee, a sight that was common to my mom in the early days of my parents' relationship. My mom starts trying to walk to them, but for whatever reason isn't getting any closer. Keeps calling out to them, and it doesn't do anything either. After a few moments of this, they both look over at my mom, and my grandma says, "It's okay, we've got her," before looking down into her arms where a small bundle is held. Mom woke up right after. She needed a good cry, but it was right after that she was able to start processing her grief of the deaths. My mom never found out what the baby, that she lost was, but she named it Caitlin after the dream that she had of my grandma. We all still miss my grandma so much, and her loss never gets any easier. Tearing up writing this, but every now and then, we know she visits. My mom, my dad, my 13-year-old sister, and myself. We've all smelled her perfume when at home. My parents have heard her voice. My cousin Aiden even once saw her at a place that he, his dad, and my grandma used to meet up all the time. I think my in-laws' house is haunted. My in-laws' house, and specifically their basement, has always given me the creeps. I don't like going into their basement by myself. It's like I feel watched. And it's only in their basement. I was there on Sunday, and I was there by myself, as my in-laws are out of town. I was doing laundry in their basement. It was just during the day, and I was assuaging some of my fears, you could say. I'd been doing laundry for a few hours, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a figure in the reflection of the TV. Obviously, I look up and see nothing. Tried to recreate what I saw, as there's a lot of collectibles in the basement. Couldn't. Then around an hour later, I hear what sounds like someone upstairs. Keep in mind that I'm alone here. Even the cat isn't home at the moment. I go up thinking it's just my sister-in-law, and nothing. An hour or so later, I hear someone coming down the stairs. And again, I go. No one's there. After that, the cat comes back in, so I could ignore some of the noises, as he's a chunk. So I explain it as being him. Around an hour before I leave, I hear a very audible floor creak from my in-law's bedroom. The cat's asleep in my mother-in-law's office, and again, I'm by myself. I never heard any creaks being that loud while I was there. The last time I was in my in-laws for laundry was while we were gone, and I saw a figure in the reflection of the TV. I saw a figure that looked like a girl wearing one of those floor-length nightgowns standing right next to me in the laundry room. Each time I see something, though, I can never see a face. And the time I saw it in the laundry room was the only time I got a pretty clear image of what was there. Now, some of the activity I can put down to, old dogs. My in-laws have 2 dogs, Max and Charlie, who died in the house. One was put to sleep, and the other died suddenly of a stroke. And I'm a firm believer that pets can stick around after death, as 2 past pets of mine have done just that. But the figures I've seen have been human in shape. There's no way around that fact. Ghost of a murder victim. I lived in this apartment building at the edge of my city from the time I was 2 to 4. We had odd things happen in that place, and I had weird dreams. My mom said that one day she heard me talking by the front door. She came and thought I was playing. Turns out I was looking at the corner of the wall and just carrying on as if I was having a normal conversation with a regular person. My mom, being terrified, she had the right to be really, she asked, "Who are you talking to?" Without missing a beat, I pointed at the corner I was looking at and said, "That man over there, Mommy. Can you see him?" Obviously, my mother couldn't see him. Another time, my mom was in the living room and she heard this loud crash from the kitchen. She goes in, worried I'd hurt myself, but instead she sees a loaf of bread on the floor and a broken lid. The lid was kind of one of those old-school Pyrex pot sets from the 90s. Now, Pyrex is known for being really durable, and that particular lid had taken a tumble a few times. This should have broken it. It wasn't until recently, when we were talking about this particular apartment to a family friend, that we found out a couple of years before I'd been born there had been murder in the building. It freaked the fuck out of my mom when she found that out. Terrified by a malevolent spirit. When I was 5, my parents and I lived in this apartment building. My family had been having many things happen. We would see figures and noises with no explanation. Our cat running around like she's being chased. I even have a photo of anomalies, like parts of photos being really shadowed. This is one of the times the spirit focused on me. I was terrified of the dark, to the point where I had a nightlight, the bathroom light was on, and shining light into my room, as well as street light coming in through the open blinds in my room from the main street that we lived nearby. My room was so well lit, I could essentially read with no issue with my light off. This night in particular, I couldn't sleep. I'm laying in bed waiting to fall asleep, and my parents were already in bed sleeping, when suddenly my room goes pitch black. I'm talking so black that I wouldn't be able to see my hand right in front of my face. I look towards where my door should be, and I see this large figure in the doorway with blood-red eyes. Being the little 5-year-old I was at the time, I screamed. I saw him begin to walk toward me, which wakes my parents. They don't get up, and they just ask me why I'm screaming. I can't get a coherent response out, and they tell me to go to their room to talk to them. They didn't know what was going on, clearly. By this point, the entity is halfway from my door to my bed. I get the courage and run. I run right through it. And as I hit where the entity is, it gets ice cold. I don't stop, though, till I get to my door. I turned around at that point. My room was back to normal. I then go tell my parents what happened. They felt horrible that they didn't come to me after I told them what happened. But over the years, people have tried to claim it was a dream. I know it wasn't, though. My main reason for knowing is because when I was a teen, I stayed at a cousin's place, told her that story. She then told me that she saw the very same entity between her and her son's crib one night. She lived a block away from my old apartment at the time. Living in a Haunted House, Part 1. I moved to France over 20 years ago. My husband and I bought an old mason bourgeois, which was built in 1789. I've always been curious about the paranormal. I've had some strange things occur in my life, but nothing prepared me for living in this house. The house needed a lot of work, but in the beginning, we just did some basic remodeling and updating. Shortly after we moved in, my daughter was born. She had invited quite a few out-of-town guests for her christening. My best friend was sleeping in a room that we were using as a guest room. She's pretty pragmatic and not really a believer in the supernatural. She was awoken by a sharp punch to her stomach. She said it was so forceful that she actually lifted off the bed. My husband laughed and said that it must have been a nightmare, but this made me feel very uneasy. Already I had experienced weird sensations and heard footsteps in the hallway. I had kept these feelings to myself. I decided to share my thoughts with my best friend. She was very unsettled by the whole episode and was reluctant to spend another night in the room. The next night, she was again hit in the stomach, although not as violently. At this point, we were both freaked out about it. She left the next day to return home. Needless to say, she now definitely believes in the paranormal. This episode was just the beginning of the strange occurrences that happened periodically throughout my time living in this house. Living in a Haunted House, Part 2. Okay, so I said in my earlier post that my husband and I bought a Maison Bourgeois in France. I'm trying. Over 20 years ago. It's a large house over 800 square meters with a hectare of land. It has 3 stories. It has a front and back staircase, and when you're in the front part of the house, you cannot hear anything that is going on in the back part of the house. My husband traveled a lot for work, and I was often left alone with my 3 young children. Since this was the case, we put in an alarm, and it had motion detectors in several rooms that might be vulnerable to a break-in. One such room was the playroom. This room is adjacent to the room I talked about in my earlier post. We used it as a guest bathroom and a bedroom, but it had 2 doors, and you had to go through this room to get to the playroom. The alarm in the playroom seemed to go off quite a lot during the dead of night, around 2 or 3 a.m. This in and of itself was enough to scare me when I was alone. I would go begrudgingly into the playroom to see what set off the alarm, only to find nothing. Sometimes one of the remote control cars would have moved, but basically nothing. We had the alarm company check it out. They found nothing as well and said, well, maybe a spider or an insect crawled in front of the motion detector. Overall, I had some pretty bad vibes in the room. One day, my son had a friend over. They were like 6 or 7. They came to me running, acting a bit hysterical. They said they heard men talking in the room. I went there to check it out, and I heard men talking, but very muffled. I looked out the window into our garden to see if perhaps it was the gardener, but no one was there. I couldn't find the source of the voices. They always seemed to be right next door no matter what room in that wing of the house I was in. I didn't want to show my son and his friend that I was scared, so we left the room and I brought them to the kitchen. Of course, later when I told the story to my husband, he said I had an overactive imagination and I was influencing my son into thinking ghosts were in our house. Once after I heard a man and a woman talking when I was in this room. It was late at night. I was tidying up after my children. My husband was on a trip and I started to be frightened. I thought somebody had broken in, but I also had a strange feeling that maybe it was something else. I called a good friend who came over with a baseball bat. Like 2 women and a baseball bat could fight off intruders of any kind. She didn't hear anything and all the doors and windows were closed and locked. I was starting to feel like maybe my husband was right and maybe I did have an overactive imagination. This, however, was not the end to the voices. And later on, several other people, many of them skeptics, also heard them. Living in a Haunted House, Part 3. There are certainly parts of the house that see more activity than others. But the activity is not limited to the house itself. The The front yard of the house is quite large with a circular driveway made of gravel. The whole property is enclosed by tall stone walls and a large gate. Though it's not very easy to enter unless you go through the gate, which is always closed, unless, of course, opened by an electronic opener. One day when my oldest son was about 10 or so, we were playing around in the yard. He was running the circular driveway and I was timing him. Then I would run it and he would time me. About halfway through running a circuit, he came barreling toward me saying, "Mommy, why'd you do that? You scared me." I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "Do what? I've been here the whole time." He said, "Someone was running right behind me, breathing down my neck. Felt like they were going to push me." The gravel was even crunching behind me. I immediately felt uneasy. I tried to reassure him, but I too had felt as if someone was walking behind me on the driveway on several occasions, only to turn around and find no one there. My daughter also had an experience walking from the front gate of the house one night. She said someone or something had pulled the scarf from her neck and threw it to the ground. She ran into the house hysterical, thinking somebody had followed her inside the gate. We turned on the lights in the yard. My husband went to check it out, but nothing. My husband said it must have been a branch from a tree or a bush, but honestly, I think it was something else. What I don't know left me feeling very uneasy. I didn't like to be out in front by myself. Living in a Haunted House, Part 4. The Man with the Stovetop Hat. Living in a house that's haunted is not at all that you see in movies, really. Months would go by and there'd be nothing out of the ordinary. There were times that I'd even start to believe that perhaps I had an overactive imagination. However, when other people share the same type of experience, it's hard to discount what you're experiencing. When we first moved into the house, we needed to do some basic updating. The electricity was very outdated. The electricians were up in the attic, which, to be honest, was not some place I really wanted to visit. They were doing some rewiring. Some wallpaper was peeling off a wall that they were working on. I decided to take it off. Underneath was a drawing in black charcoal of a very tall figure in a stovetop hat. Creepiest thing I ever saw. Definitely not a child's drawing. Made a real impression on me, to be honest. Tried to put it out of my mind. Years later, like at least 8, we were preparing to go on vacation. The car was loaded up and my husband asked my oldest son to go back inside the house. Wanted to make sure all the lights were turned off. After about 5 minutes, he came racing out of the front door, terrified. "There's a man in your room." My husband and I went inside and searched the house. No one was there. My son later told us as he reached the landing in the front of our bedroom, he saw movement in the room. He looked inside and saw a tall man dressed in black with a hat looking out the window. The man then started to approach him with his arm out. He ran out of there as fast as he could. This experience so affected him that he wouldn't sleep by himself during our vacation. He was about 11 at the time. We talked about it quite a bit during the vacation, and my youngest son, who was 4, said, "Mommy, a man comes to see me at night. He sits in the chair by my bed." I tried to talk about this with my husband because it seriously freaked me out, but he chalked it up to an overactive imagination. I never saw the man, but on numerous occasions whilst I was sleeping, I would wake up feeling panicked, and I'd have the sensation that someone was standing over me. I would burrow under the covers and pretend to still be sleeping. It made me feel like a child who's afraid to look under her bed or needs a nightlight. Who was this man that both my sons claimed to see? Was he the man in the charcoal drawing on the attic wall, I wonder? Living in a Haunted House, Part 5. The Humming Lady. They always seem to be in the next room, but when I go to that room, they seem to be in another room. It sounds like a muffled conversation. We remodeled our house, and after the work, I started to hear a woman humming. Always a cheerful tune, but not one that I knew. At times I really felt as if I was going crazy, but a friend of mine heard it as well. We were having coffee in the kitchen. I went to the restroom. My friend heard the humming and thought it was me. She started having a conversation with me, expecting me to be just outside of the kitchen door. Obviously, I didn't answer as I wasn't there. When I did come back, she told me about what had happened. Never told her about the humming lady. We both felt this was really strange, but oddly enough, we weren't frightened. It just seemed that whatever was humming was not malevolent. Living in a Haunted House, Part 6. The Face in the Window. This is probably the scariest experience I've had. Before we remodeled, the house had a door in the kitchen that led to our yard. Our yard was full of very tall trees. It was quite large. That night, it was really dark from all the trees, and the winter months' darkness fell quickly. Several times while in the kitchen alone at night, I would see what seemed to be quick movement by the door to the garden. Sometimes the dog would be outside, and I thought maybe it was them. But at other times, there really was no explanation. Once I saw what appeared to be a very pale, gaunt face looking in. No body was attached, just a face. But it was so fleeting I could convince myself it was my imagination. One night, my babysitter was in the kitchen, trying to help me fix dinner. My two youngest were also in the kitchen. It was winter, so outside was pitch black. My daughter yelled, "Mommy, a man just stuck his head around the door." The babysitter just quickly opened the door to look out, and there was no one there. A few minutes later, my son said, "There he is." We quickly looked around, and we all saw a face looking in. I ran to the door, and my babysitter went outside with me. Once again, no one there. Turned on the outside lights, and we couldn't see anyone outside. We were all a bit freaked out, and the dogs started to bark, but I was too scared to put them outside. I didn't want anything to happen to them. I quickly checked the doors, made sure they were locked, and what was it? No idea. A ghost or an intruder? If it's an intruder, I'm not sure how they would have gotten in our yard, as it's enclosed with a very tall stone wall. Whatever it was disappeared without a trace. Never saw another face in the window after that. Haunted Library Visit. In my town, we have a library. It's almost as old as the town itself. When I was about 12, I was assigned a history paper in school. Since we got to pick the topic, I decided that I wanted to do it on the history of the town itself. I went to the library to get some research material. The library is actually a large 2-story house previously owned by one of the town's original prominent families. The second floor was off limits unless you received permission from the staff to go up there. They store most of their historic documents and books up there. I was given permission to go upstairs to look through those books. I had no preconceived notions about the library, but I felt really creeped out upstairs alone for some reason. I was going through the books trying to find something interesting. From one of the side rooms, I heard a loud bang, like a door being slammed, which was odd since they had removed all the doors. I feel really uneasy about being upstairs now. But I'm there for a reason. So, I decided to see what it was. Maybe a bookcase shelf gave out. I took a look in the side room, and there's only an old-school writing desk with a little plaque that says Mr. Putnam, 1885. The room was a bit cold, but nothing is out of place. A little confused, I shrugged it off and go back to the center room and keep digging through books. I finally find a book that covers what I'm looking for. I sit down to start reading. I get a few pages into the book and nearly have a heart attack when I hear another loud bang from another side of the room. This time it sounded like somebody threw a brick at the wall. I can see into part of the room, and it looks like it was a nursery or a playroom based on the tiny rocking chair and the teddy bear next to it. For some reason, I was terrified of going to that room. I did anyways, though, because I'm a dumbass. I walked into the room and turned to look at the corner. Wasn't able to see this from outside. I'm frozen in utter terror as I meet the eyes of a young woman in a white dress. She's hanging from the ceiling by her neck. She seemed to see me, but was motionless. I tried to yell, but just couldn't get it out. I was, however, able to break free of her horrible gaze, run downstairs and out of the library. I sprinted 6 blocks home. Wasn't until I told people about it that I found out sort of one of the maids that worked in the house had become pregnant out of wedlock. She hung herself in that room. I still hate going near that library. Bedtime ghost story. One evening when I was about 15, I was home alone for the night. I'd lived in an older 2-story home. I often felt uncomfortable by myself in the house at night, especially in my room since it had the door to our creepy attic. I spent the evening watching TV downstairs, adequately distracted from being by myself. At some point, I decided I was ready for bed. I went upstairs to my room. I shared a room and bunk bed with my older brother. He usually got home late and went to bed after me. Our bed was pushed in the corner of the room against the wall. The bottom bunk was mine. I was pretty tired, so I laid down and fell asleep almost immediately. Shortly after that, I woke up to my brother sticking his arm through the gap between the side of the bed and the wall, slapping it. It's dark, but I can clearly make out his arm smacking against the wall. Annoyed, I tell him to stop and roll over to try to sleep. Of course, he keeps slapping the wall, but even harder now. Getting angry at this point, so I tell him that if he doesn't stop, I'm gonna hit him. No surprise, but he starts slapping even harder. I'm done with his shenanigans and roll over to punch him in the arm, but instead just hit the wall. A little freaked out that he pulled his arm away so quickly, I get out of bed and rip his covers off to reveal no one's there. I'm officially, nope, the heck out of there mode. Scurry downstairs to spend the rest of the night scared and alone. Everything died about a year ago, but as of a month back, it's starting to happen again. So I used to have an intense poltergeist experience. Things in front of me would literally be thrown across the room. And once I was on the edge of sleep when something grabbed my foot. I felt it yank me to the very bottom of my bed. The latest to that string of events was about 5 months ago, before quarantine. I heard something while I was home alone running through the halls. Keep in mind, both my dogs were with me, and I have no cats. After that, things just stopped for about a month. This is when my mom had her friends over. They were all outside talking, from which I can see from my window. And all of a sudden I hear loud, constant banging on my door, as if I didn't open it. I would bust open, so I swing it open mid-bang, expecting my little sister. but absolutely nothing. No one's there, and no one's in the hall. I'm on the second story, so if somebody would have ran down the stairs, I would have heard them. After that, things died down to the occasional bangs and things falling without obvious solutions until last night. When I say last night was one of the most terrifying nights of my life, I mean it. It started when I went to visit my sister, who just moved. She moved into an old 83-year-old house. And this house, as soon as I walked in, I knew something was wrong, especially when I was alone. So, I did a little investigation, just asking if there was a spirit to give me a sign. Nothing happened until that following night. Last night, August 18th, around 21:50. On our way home, I spotted some lights in the air, about 25,000 feet up. As we get closer, I realized they weren't moving now. If you may not know, helicopters and blimps cannot go that high. Planes can't stay in one place, so it ruled out any of those. So I just labeled it as a UFO, as in the actual term, an unidentified flying object. It was around 8:40 p.m., so about 2040. Then we get home around 9:30. As soon as I walked in again, I could feel something was off. My dogs didn't run up to me like usual. They weren't as hyper. It even turns out one of them had a number 2 in our game room. So I go clean it. Our trash can is nowhere to be found. I look in the upstairs, downstairs, kitchen, literally nowhere. Then all of a sudden it appears in the middle of the game room. This is the little event of last night, by the way. So I thought it was strange, but I just went along with my night. Around 9:50 p.m., which is 21:50, that's when I was heading to bed. As soon as I walked into my room, I had been doing some work on my loft, so I had a ladder up. The ladder fell, hit my ceiling fan, breaking off the blade to which I have a picture of, almost ripped out the fan. Quickly turn the fan off, break the ladder down. At this point, I have no clue what's going on this night. Picking up pieces of a fan when I hear another loud crash behind and look behind me. It was literally nothing. Nothing had fallen. But I hear another crash from behind me. Where I was looking before, again I look and nothing fell. This continues all night, and I'm writing this at 9:54 a.m. I don't even want to go into my room. Well, I finished picking up the pieces. I got ready for bed at this point. It's like 10:30 p.m., which is 22:30. I climb in bed, lay on my side, as I always do. Clear as day, I hear something or someone running behind me off the other side of the bed. I jump up, ready to hit someone. No one's there. Like a little kid, I check my closet under my bed. Also, I'm a small paranormal investigator. Turns out that the most activity I got wasn't even in the investigation. It was in my own house. Try to lay on my side again, but every time, I hear something running on the other side. So I lay flat on my back. Now it's around 11:45, 23:45. I'm trying to recall everything, but it was so scary that it's a little hard to recall. So around midnight, I decide to lay on my back, not turn over no matter what I do for a solid 10 minutes. I hear the constant running. Then, as clear as day, I see a little kid run from the bottom of my bed. I could see through my wall and they would vanish. I'm completely freaked out now, so I turn my lights on and just sit there. I've just moved into this room last month. Everyone who was in it before had always felt a sensation of being watched, and so did I. Sat there till 1:30 a.m., finally just passed out and go to sleep. But I'm awoken by a strange noise at 3 or 3:30. I have absolutely no idea what they were, but it sounded like gurgling or growling of some sort. Even when I was fully awake, I still heard it. That's when I heard a bang on my closet door, so I fling it open. No one's in there. I don't recall what happened after this, but I remember staying up to sounds and weird things till 4:30, then finally going to sleep and staying asleep. And that was one of my scariest nights ever. My cat comes back to me when I'm sad. So when I was a kid, I had the prettiest cat ever. Her name was Ansa. We got her in 2004 when I was 5 years old. She was the best girl, and we were literally inseparable. She always came to sleep next to me. Wherever I was, she would come sit on my lap or near me. If she was outside hunting, she would come running whenever I called her. And if I was sad or sick, she would lick me and come, lay next to me. She started purring every time I even looked at her, and she purred loudly, like she was the ultimate purr machine. We lost her when I was in the army, so I didn't have a chance to say goodbye. It broke me when I got the message from my mom that she told my cat had died. She was sleeping, I guess, but then again, she was old, so I had been expecting it. We still had 2 cats, but still, nothing could replace her. And as much as I loved the other cats, she was special. After that, whenever I'm visiting my parents' place and I feel sad or anxious about something, I start hearing this quiet, soft purring underneath my bed. It sounds like her purring. The first time I heard it, I thought that there was one of the other cats under the bed. But then I looked and I saw nothing, but I could still hear it. It's been almost 2 years now since he died, and last time I heard the purring was last Saturday. My room's door was closed, so I knew there was no other cats in my room. I needed some alone time because my cat can be a bit exhausting at times. I was just laying on my bed feeling a bit down. I started hearing it again, the soft purring under my bed. And nowadays, I don't even bother checking. I know I can't see a cat there, I just accept it, and it does calm me down. Makes me feel better, so whatever the purring is, it helps me. I just like to think that it's my pretty girl, still wanting to make me feel better like she did when she was still with us. The Battle of Spirits. My boyfriend can sometimes see dead people. I can't. He told me that his first encounter was his stillborn big brother when he was about 5 years old. He met him in a school toilet. They talked a little, then he disappeared and he didn't see him again until recently. Now, my boyfriend's apartment hallway and toilet had always freaked me out. I always felt like there was something there watching me. The first time I had that feeling, I was in a shower. I could have sworn there was someone on the other side of that curtain. I was literally shaking because I was so afraid. But when I slided the curtain to the side, there was nothing there. Once when I was watching the TV, I saw a reflection from the window. It was a dark figure moving away from the bed to the hallway. My boyfriend was cooking in the kitchen, so there was no way it could have been him. I didn't tell him about it because I didn't want to freak him out, and I was doubting my eyes. I've also seen shadows in the hallway mirror, but again, I was doubting my eyes. My boyfriend has insomnia, and one night he was on the couch playing mobile games while I was sleeping on the bed. I often see nightmares, and according to him, I was acting restless again. He turned to see if I was okay, but he saw a dark figure standing at the edge of the bed. It left immediately when my boyfriend saw it and disappeared in the hallway again. My boyfriend sat the rest of the night at the end of the bed protecting me from whatever that was. And that morning, I told him about the dark shadow figures I had seen. Once when we were coming back from the store, my boyfriend started to open the door with his key, but the key didn't turn. He tried many times, and when it finally turned, he had to pull hard to get the door open. Later, he told that it was something like pulling back at it. When he finally pulled the door open, I saw the air move inside in the hallway, like on a warm day outside. When we stepped in, he felt really weird, like we're not welcome there. Then one night we're watching a movie at his place. I had a migraine, and kind of started to feel sick and overall super tired and grumpy on top. When the movie ended, I crawled into bed. My boyfriend joined me, hugging me and trying to make me feel better. It was around 1:30 a.m. when suddenly all the hairs in his body stood up and he froze. He started squeezing me even tighter, almost hurting me. Told him to let me go, and he loosened his grip and turned to me and said, "Honey, I don't want to scare you, but there's someone behind the front door." I was confused. Couldn't hear anything. Couldn't even see the door from the bed. He stood up and walked to the hallway. Suddenly he kind of jumped, backed off and stared at the corner. He stood there for a while and reached his hand forward. My migraine disappeared because I was so scared. I didn't know what was going on. Couldn't see whatever my boyfriend could see. Thought it was the shadow I'd seen before. After a while, my boyfriend came back. He seemed calm and just said, "He's gone now." I was just staring at him, and then he continued, "I think it was my brother." He was just smiling and looking at me. We then talked, and he said he didn't feel scared at all when he saw the man. He felt warm and loved. The man was young, like my boyfriend's brother would be. He had the family ears. I painted my boyfriend's family coat of arms on the wall before. The man had stood right next to it. My boyfriend's just he thought he came to warn him about something, but he wasn't sure what it was about, really, because he didn't say anything. But nevertheless, my boyfriend seemed happy about the encounter, and I was happy for him. I was getting more and more scared for some reason. Then maybe a half an hour would pass. We were just talking about his brother and his family. This is when my boyfriend got goosebumps again. He looked at me and he said, "He's back." But this time he looked a lot more worried. He jumped out of bed and ran to the hallway. He stood there for a while. Then he ran to grab a candle. While he was running, he told me he was feeling something freezing cold. It was coming through the front door. Go all the way to the toilet to the wall in the kitchen. He shut all the windows, lit up the candle, and blew the candle. The smoke rising from it went crazy, spiraled all around the kitchen, but there was no wind inside. My boyfriend backed off and came to the bed and grabbed me to protect me. He told me that he thinks it's a poltergeist and his brother's fighting it. Sat there for a while, then suddenly I felt, completely calm, like a weight had been lifted. My boyfriend felt it too. We looked at each other. He whispered, "Wonder if it's over." And right after that, our dustpan that was leaning against the wall fell over. He smiled and said, "I'll take that as a yes. I guess my brother won." After that, we stayed awake for a long time, talking about what had just happened. I kept telling him to thank his brother for protecting and warning us. After that, we haven't seen or felt anything weird in his apartment. I've always been a skeptic, but my boyfriend made me doubt myself after a few weird experiences. I'm 21, and until now, I've never really believed in paranormal stuff. I always tried to find a logical explanation for everything. I met my boyfriend about 4 months ago. He told me that he can sometimes see dead people. Thought he was joking and trying to freak me out, but he was dead serious. And I don't see why he would lie to me about stuff like that. Also, Few things that have happened that really made me doubt myself. First off, I used to think I've never seen dead people. When I was a kid, I saw a dark figure standing in a doorway at my parents' place once. I'll tell more about the doorway later, but I can't remember if it was a nightmare or not. I also saw a lot of nightmares about a small girl living in our storage room. My parents' house is well over 400 years old. I still sometimes get the feeling that someone's following me when I'm visiting my parents, but I used to just think it was anxiety. I hadn't told anyone this, my boyfriend, when we went to his parents, but when I showed him the house, he seemed uncomfortable in some of the rooms, kept staring at what seemed like emptiness. He asked if people had died in that house. I told him that probably many people had died there because it was just such an old house, but I only knew of one. At that point, I didn't know I didn't know that he could see dead people, let's just make it frank. He also was really uneasy when he met my grandpa and seemed a bit odd. I thought he was just nervous. The next night was the one when he told me about his ability to see dead people. He told me about seeing people sitting on chairs. He also told me about seeing an old man that looked a lot like my grandpa, and that's why he was uneasy with him. Because at first, he wasn't sure if my grandma or grandpa was alive, or if he was a dead one. I showed him a picture of my great-grandpa who looked exactly like my grandpa, and he said that he was the man that he saw. He also described seeing a fat man dressed in early 1900s clothing, wearing glasses. I showed him a picture of a man who owned the house before my family, and the boyfriend confirmed that it was him. Then he told about the presence of the doorway, the same doorway I saw in the nightmare. He didn't know anything about that yet. He said he couldn't see anything, but he said it felt like he walked through something freezing cold. I went to go get a fan from storage. It was really warm in my room. He stayed at the door and noped off, told me that something had grabbed and brushed his foot. Now, this was the same room I used to see nightmares about too when I was a kid. It just freaks me out because he has no way of knowing about my nightmares or what the people living there used to look like. I'd like to hear more about stuff like this, but I just don't want to ask him too much. Maybe because he's had a really bad experience with dead people. Is there an easy way of approaching him about it? Also, these aren't the only weird things that have happened after I met him. These are just the ones that made me doubt my thoughts. My friend Uncle Jim. I already knew about this ghost before this experience. He died in a house fire in the 80s. And when a new house was built on top of his old house, he decided to occupy it. He was friendly, never tried to harm me or scare me, just wanted to have fun at our expense. Tuesday night, my roommates are gone. Sweetness, I have the house to myself. Just finished making dinner and was watching a movie while my laundry dried. It's done. As I'm walking back to my room, I pass the front door and notice it's unlocked. I'm about to go to bed, so I might as well lock it now and save some time. Fold the laundry, now back to the movie. But my cat starts crying at the door like he wants out. When I go to let him out, I open the door and he runs out. That's weird, I thought to myself. Could have sworn I locked the deadbolt. I must be tired. It's bedtime. As I'm lying in bed, I can't help but shake this feeling. I don't know what it is, but I can't sleep. So I get up and just walk around. I walk past the front door and it's unlocked. Now I know something's up. because I definitely locked that like half an hour ago. What the fuck is going on? I lock it again and walk to the kitchen for a snack. Munching on my snack, playing on my phone, I hear a click come from the front door. It's unlocked again. Nobody's outside. Roommates' cars are all gone. What the fuck, yo? I lock it and sit there waiting. A couple minutes go by, and sure enough, the deadbolt turns unlocked on its own. So I lock it again and wait. I sat there, straight eyeballing the deadbolt in silence. Just as I predicted it, it starts to unlock itself. Uncle Jim, I know that's you. I made sure to say it in kind of a playful voice. I know that's you. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. Play tomorrow. The lock stopped rotating and then returned to the locked position. I left, came back about an hour or so later. It was still locked. It was still when I woke up the next morning, too. Uncle Jim didn't come back the next day to play. Aw. Clap. Me and my sister were very young, and we had a full-time maid babysitting us. I guess because our parents were working. I was probably 9 and my sister was 6. The house helper was 40. So I've always been into such stories of the unknown, and I was a weird kid. Not surprised something like this happened, really. I was with my sister, and also the sitter. We were all laying down. I was on the bed, my sister and the lady were on the floor mattress. We were chatting and singing songs, and nothing really being related to ghosts. And suddenly we heard the center of our position a loud clap. A very distinct, clear, loud clap. We were looking at each other. We knew that it wasn't any of us. It was such an intimidating sound, like a clap made by someone with stiff hands. We looked at each other, as if asking about it, and nobody of us could understand what had happened. My sister wanted to use the washroom, and that sitter insisted that we shouldn't move. However, I convinced her. As we're sitting in the living room and the washroom was in the other room, we had to go there. We formed like a line and went in, and to our shock, the washroom was locked from inside. Now, we literally got terrified overthinking about every scenario possible. And more than the probability of a ghost, we thought there might be an intruder. It was an apartment, and we called our neighbors from the flat below. They broke into the washroom and called us to be at their place for a while. This lady never came back the next day because of how scared she was. That building was, in fact, creepy on its own. We were the only 2 families staying there, and the topmost floor was occupied by some college students. That house had a few weird instances throughout our stay. I told my mom about it, and fortunately, she believed us. She's had felt strange about that house too, really. We were staying there for like 4.5 years already. In the beginning, all the flats were occupied, and everything was normal. And it happened only later when all the people left, and we 2 were the only family staying there. We left that place too. We were feeling unsafe by the passing time. Though a few years later, my dad changed that apartment into his office space, and he never felt anything there, but my sister and I remember that it did happen. We got goosebumps talking about it once, so we avoid touching that. Family friend's dad scared them one last time. When I was a baby, my mom and dad attended a funeral for her best friend's dad. He had committed suicide. Her dad was a security guard who worked second shift. Every night he would come home, eat his dinner, and have a glass of whiskey. He would do this at his seat at the table. One night he came home, ate his dinner, drank his whiskey, then shot himself. After the burial, a small group of people went back to the house for lunch and drinks. My mom and dad were one of the few people to leave because I was still a baby. My mom told Jean she would call her the next day and check on her. The next day, my mom calls Jean and she tells my mom to come over because she wouldn't believe what she had to tell her over the phone. Mom goes to Jean's house and told him what happened. Around 10 the night of the burial, really, Jean and her family decided it was time for bed. Jean had 2 sisters and a brother, all of whom lived out of state, and she lived at home with their parents. They cleaned up the house from the guests that they had over, including washing and drying the dishes. They all went upstairs to go to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, one of the sisters got up to use the bathroom, heard a noise coming from the kitchen, then what sounded like footsteps going into the dining room. Didn't think anything of it until she saw someone was in bed. So she woke up the brother, who then woke everyone else up. He grabbed a baseball bat and led his mom and 3 sisters downstairs to see what was going on. They go into the kitchen and see one of the cabinets are open. He could have sworn it was shut when they went to bed. He put the dishes away after all. Then he went into the dining room where he lost it. He turned on the light and saw that the chair their dad used to sit in was pulled out like someone had been sitting there. And on the tablecloth was what looked like a ring of condensation from a glass. They all freaked out and ran upstairs. A few days went by and Jean went to the store to pick up some pictures from a roll of film that she had dropped off the day after the funeral. As she looked through them, her face turned white. She showed her mom a picture that was taken with everyone around the dining room table, and in the middle of the picture, there was her dad's chair. It was seated, like a faded figure of her dad. The story of my familiar visitors. This is all from personal experience. I hope you enjoy reading as much as I enjoy sharing it. It's one of those things that change the way I handle whatever life throws my way. My parents divorced when I was very young. I chose to stay with my mother and my sisters. So I looked up to my grandfather as a male role model, pretty much ever since. Sadly, he passed away when I was 6 or so I didn't really have a chance to talk about the true things of life with him. However, he made sure to teach me valuable lessons through his stories. As far as I know, he was like horned by a bull. A train rammed his truck, which left him with more than 100 stitches all over his body. He fell to the sea on a fishing trip, got lost and was presumed dead before washing ashore 2 days later. He was a member of the National Secret Service, which I could verify myself through an ID. My grandpa kept under his lock and key, but, teenagers. This is not in the U.S., by the way. He survived 2 types of cancer. Well, the third he didn't, however. Many other accidents accounted for in his pictures and newspaper articles and the tales of my grandmother and her children, my mom included. You'd have a hard time believing, but I digress anyway. The day he passed away, I remember coming home from school to find my mother crying at my grandmother's place. They were in the dinner hall. We lived like 2 blocks away. He tells me Grandpa has left the building and starts sobbing, urging me to do so if I wanted. Oddly, I was totally aware of the fact that he wouldn't be coming back home from the hospital, where he used to go a couple times a week for treatment. Didn't feel the need to cry or weep or sob or mourn or whatever. In fact, I felt my grandfather was with me at that moment. I just hugged my mom and tried to do my best to cheer up and say anything like, "Don't worry, I'm sure he'll hang around for a while." You may argue I was a child with a totally oblivious idea of death. but having had an accident around that time in which I almost bled myself to death, and that ended up kind of saving my life by allowing the doctors to detect my type 1 diabetes. This is how I became pretty well versed, and having read my first encyclopedia by the age of 5, I was quite calm and had another level of understanding about such themes. I knew my grandfather was there, and, well, from then on I would follow and protect, or rather he would, sort of like a guardian angel. I remember the old man used to love fishing. Sometimes we got up real early on weekends and went fishing to the beach. I live in a coastal town, and this would just be for the fun of it. A week after he died, I had this dream of an ideal lake, your typical Eden surrounded by lush forest and wildlife. We, being my grandpa and I, we were sitting on a boat, fishing rods in hand, silent and smiling, enjoying the calm weather, listening to the waves crest the shore, the faint buzzing of insects roaming by, an occasional squirrel or deer showing up. As time went by inside my dream, dark clouds started to show up on the horizon, engulfing color out of the forest itself. Everything turned dark and withered into a lifeless and rotting parody of the lively picture that surrounded us. Trees, plants, the fish, water, all life forms were consumed, almost as if torched from their very inside. I remember I was calm, though. Can't recall how somebody would be calm in such visions of death, just making their way around me. The eyes of my grandfather turned into a blazing stare, which I'll never forget. He opened his mouth, as in like a furious roar, and then vanished. We never said a word, but I knew this was his farewell. Days later, my mother was looking at some pictures of the old man, and amidst them, I found one of the place I had seen in my dreams. She tells me it used to be a ranch he owned way back before I was born, when she was very young, in fact. I'd never been there, not even as a baby, but I described it in great detail to her. She just burst into tears and hugged me. Some years later, like when I was 16 or 17 and lived at my grandma's, I had a very peculiar dream. I was relaxing and pretty much doing nothing besides one of your typical old classic muscle cars in the street in front of my grandma's. Nearby, resting on the car's back bumper, was a rectangular thing, which I can really only describe as the frame of a mirror. Out of nowhere, a very sick-looking, water-like surface appears in the mirror. Think of it as the effect of paintings in Super Mario 64, but with, enhanced water caustics. A single drop of liquid blasts out of the waves in the surface and floats until it's about a foot away from me. Then a blinding flash of light spans from the drop, and my grandfather appears in front of me. If you have trouble understanding my reference, think something like this. He looked just as I remembered him. An aged man, half-bald, with a very serene look, his body tanned and more skinny than athletic. However, he seemed to be full of life in a way I can't explain. It's like knowing somewhere inside someone's eyes there's a child waiting to burst into hyperactivity with a sugar rush. He dusted off his clothes and greeted me in a way that I felt was more like a friend of his rather than his relative. Of course, by now, I knew my jaw was open and I was being severely mind-fucked in a dream. Imagine that. But nonetheless, I kept my composure and greeted him, asked him how he was, and told him how much I missed him and all that jazz. He asked back how everybody was. He said he was watching me and was proud of me. And I was doing well and taking care of my sisters and my mother. We chatted about the last years. I couldn't resist the temptation to ask him where he was and how stuff was going wherever he was. He says, and I vividly remember, he called it that place was like an infinite, pristinely white corridor filled with doors. No matter which door you chose, you opened it, and you could do whatever you wanted, with whoever you wanted, whenever you wanted. I remember he described how he was having a great time horse riding, taking care of cattle, spending days playing dominoes and smoking cigars with his friends. Activities I recall were his greatest pleasures in life. There were no limits to what you chose, imagined, or wanted to do simply. I was amazed by his description, decided not to ask any further. At some point he said he had to go back, because he had been granted permission to visit us for the night, and his time was about to finish. Once again, he sent his regards to the family in 2 specific messages. To my mother, he recommended checking herself with the doctor. To my grandma, he told her she should sell the ranch. Times were hard. But he prohibited her from selling the house. He had built it, and it would stay in his family forever, no questioning. As soon as he finished, he waved away and threw himself into the liquid mirror, back into wherever it was that he came from. I saw myself turning around and feeling a breeze in the dream, just as I was waking up. When I did wake up, I remembered everything perfectly, pieced all of this in my mind as a rather creative and intriguing experience. I was shaving early in the morning when my grandma came around. Well, I decided to tell her everything about the dream. To me, it meant nothing. But when I finished and turned around and saw her face distorted into a mix of shock and disbelief, I was more surprised about her expression and asked what was wrong. Nothing, she said. It's just that today is his death's 10th anniversary. She also delivered the message to my mother. She was confused at first, but guess what? The medical check found a tumor which, fortunately enough, was detected so early on that it could be extracted without any risk. She was scared when they first told her, but pulled through and is perfectly healthy now. I swear, I don't know what to think about this. Been a couple more odd experiences, which I will tell another time, but for the time being, I trust that somewhere out there, my guardian angel's enjoying a cigar, watching, proud of his first grandchild, me. This was posted back on October 24th, 2011. A lot of things have happened in my life, both expected and surprising, pleasant and unpleasant. I finished college, got my own business, got a lot of work. He's never left my side. I can feel him, and I know it. For the last couple of years, I waited for the right time to continue, and the time is now. I studied chemical engineering, graduated with honors. One of my 2 sisters married and moved to another town, really. Then divorced and came back. Of the other one, I knew next to nothing for a while. That was because she lived with her boyfriend. I wasn't jealous and I didn't really care. She also graduated in chem and English. Had the sweetest and smartest and grouchiest, just like her mother, couple of kids you'll ever meet. We're far more close than we used to now. Recently my mom was, who raised us 3 by herself, by the way. Recently my mom met a good man. And it appears that they're in a rush to marry and spend the rest of their lives together. I don't really mind. I appreciate what she's done for me, and I support her in any way I can. As long as she's, educated me, and I'm mature enough to respect her decision to approve of her happiness. But I'm not her father, of course, and my guardian would have something to say about it. There's nothing wrong at all with the idea of my mom moving to another country to enjoy a break from the hard years of raising us alone. Left to enjoy the pleasures and the luxuries of life, with a fitting gentleman at her side. But my life accelerated too fast, and in the rush to answer my own questions my own way, I felt like I had left some of my trust in him behind. I'd become a lot more withdrawn, thoughtful, and silent. Felt unsure about things. What about me? It's October 21st. Almost 2 years have passed since I told you my visitor. Time flies, doesn't it? Last August, I created my own company with some friends. Doing great, thank God, and him. With his blessing and his picture in my wallet, we've risen to be amongst the top of our class in my region. I always look at him when in doubt. I always ask him when I'm in despair. I always pray to him when contrived. I would not be different this time. One day my mom tells me that she's met a guy online. You know, the kind of guy your baptism godmother introduces you to your mom, hoping that they'll match up. Well, surprise, they did. And all of a sudden I see my mom fall deeply in love with some dude she can only Skype with. Well, he's not fooling around either. He decided to visit us in September. The man my mother chose to be her partner arrived last week. He's a nice American gentleman who's raised a couple of kids but divorced when they grew up. My mom chose him, but I wanted to make sure I needed to know. My grandfather would have to tell me. And so I asked him. Quietly. 2 nights ago, actually. If you approve of her choice and decide this is the best for her, just give me a sign to be sure so I won't be left to drift myself in these rapids. Let her journey be the one that, you've chosen her as her reward. I don't know if I was referred to accepting the fact that she's going away or the fact I'll be left on my own with my life ahead of me all of a sudden. Maybe it was just a hunch I had. Something I had to say for him to reassure me. With that idea in mind, I slept. And I know I dreamt. I can't remember it. I know it's important. I know I'll remember in due time. But it just drives me crazy. The only thing that could calm me down came in within the first 3 minutes of the day. As I log into Facebook and check my notification, my mom's chat pops up. Victor, he asked me to marry him. So happy I'm crying. Can't believe it, I'm so happy. I wish your grandfather was here. And as I read the messages and tried my best to digest them in a half-awoken stupor, yet another notification popped up. My mom posting on my wall. She must be going nuts over it, I thought to myself. Then I clicked on it. I stared at the post, jaw wide open to the floor, eyes staring like highway roadkills in my mind, blown by the nth time to my life, really. He's still here with me, I knew it. Look at what my cousin Sandra found. It's a picture of you and Grandpa. Sandra and my mom had not met in years. Since the last great family reunion back in the early 2000s. They're not in contact and don't really talk to each other, not even through Facebook. They live in cities over 300 miles away from each other. The picture is a 2 to 3-year-old me, held proudly in my grandfather's arms. His smile exudes happiness and pride in a way I can't describe with words alone. As my gaze meets his on the screen, I hear his words in my head. Don't worry, little man. I've got you on this one. I'm not an emotional guy. I'm not the kind that lets feelings get to him. But I couldn't hold back my tears, and I smiled and quietly thanked him again. A lot's happened since. It's now 2020. Sadly, my grandmother, with whom I lived for almost half my life, passed away last year. And of course, she paid me a visit of her own.